So there's plenty of digitally enabled thinking that's going on around in our world. But I guess the truth of the matter is that there's also quite a lot of disconnected or standalone. And the question really is, for us as a business, for SAB Miller as a business, is there a more efficient way in which we can avoid perhaps unnecessary reinvention from scratch, unnecessarily reinventing the wheel, and see if we could end up with something that perhaps makes a kind of gives us the flexibility that we require in the business, but also gives us a framework. So what we did was we added into the research that we did looking at our own behaviors and what we were doing. We also went out and actually, I used to work on the agency side, and ever since I came client side, I found it extraordinary how when you ring up and ask whether somebody might be willing to talk to you, if you're doing it as a client, they say yes. You're doing it as an agency, they say you're trying to sell me something. If you do it as a client, they say yes. And people were very generous. The Wendy Clark at Coca-Cola, Keith Weed at Unilever, the CMO at Pernod Ricard, the ex-CMO at EMI, Derek Scobie at Google, Kantar people were very willing to give time and give input to my brain and to our small working group at SAB Miller to think about how could and should we be structuring our thinking about how to get digital going forward. And we brought people together from around our world and spent a couple of days. And there were two key moments I wanted to share with you. And I'm sure, because you're all much more digitally savvy than I am, they'll be bleeding obvious. But to me, they were tremendously important moments of thinking about digital and how SAB Miller needs to think about getting digital. The first moment was a realization that actually nothing's changed. Everything's changed and nothing's changed. And this is a quote from Kotler, Philip Kotler and Levy in '69. Marketing is that function of the organization that can keep in constant touch with the organization's consumers, read their needs, develop products that meet their needs, and build a program of communications to express the organization's purposes. That's written in 1969, and I think that's as good a definition as I have ever read of what marketing needs to be today. The second thing, which was kind of directly linked to that, was a recognition that says, if we're asking the question, what should SAB Miller's digital strategy be, we're asking the wrong question. The right question is, what should SAB Miller's strategy be for winning in a digitally enabled world? It's not what should our digital strategy be, it should be what is our strategy for winning in a digitally enabled world. And those two simple thoughts led us to a Greek temple. And you might think, and actually I just realized that of course a Greek temple perhaps is not such a good thing right now in the current state of, mind you, it was built a hell of a long time ago, these various Greek temples, and they're still standing. And I wanted to share this with you, and with apologies, there's a couple of things I won't put up, but I'll talk to you and it'll hopefully all make sense. The Greek temple is the framework that we're adopting in SAB Miller to think about how we get digital. And what it's all about, if you like the roof on the temple, is this issue of winning in a digitally enabled world. That's what it's all pointing towards. And within that, we think there are three foundations that are critical foundations. The first one is culture. So we need to how do we approach winning in a digitally enabled world? We have to build the right culture. And that culture has many dimensions to it. And it needs to understand both the opportunities and risks of operating in a digitally enabled world. And again, to Scott's first point, it's not digital as media, it's the risks and opportunities of operating in a digitally enabled world. And we had a little wake up, I guess, about some of the risks, which was, I don't know if any of you will have seen, but certainly it was important to us in SAB Miller. There was a big deal recently with a charity called ActionAid, whose contention was that SAB Miller is avoiding paying tax and does it by where it sites its operations and how it runs its books, and et cetera, et cetera. And we fervently believe they have no basis on which to make those accusations. But the truth of the matter is, they can make those accusations, and they hijacked various of our brand websites. And they managed to make a connection between our brands and the corporation in a way that wouldn't have happened, would have been much more difficult for them to do with a world not digitally enabled. So there are opportunities and there are threats. And again, that whole connection, I think Unilever, have one of the stories I've heard about why they've gone away from the campaign for real beauty on Dove, which seems to me to be a great mistake, but anyway, is because somebody has kind of pointed out, but you, Unilever, own Dove on the one hand and Axe or Lynx on the other hand. You seem to be talking out of both sides of your mouth at the same time. But I mean, that whole thing about corporate integrity and the relationship between brands, that's part of what's in the culture. It's not just about brand marketing, it's about customer service. It's not just about a medium. I think it has huge impact on planning cycles. I think real life data, real life intimate understanding of what's being said about you and your brands and the ability to react to it creates challenges for large corporations that are used to an 18-month planning cycle. So I think there's huge questions and opportunities and risks for people who don't address building the culture. For us as a business, again, an obvious area in the spirit of not unnecessarily reinventing is about technical standards and platforms, common technical standards and platforms, whether it's hosting, whether it's app development, whether it's common analytics. Again, up until this point, the good news is we've experienced a whole lot of different ones. And the question is, as we go forward, what's the right balance? Because I think if you put all of your eggs in one basket, we're probably not doing justice to what we should be doing. But on the other hand, having every single egg in a completely separate basket and no connection between them doesn't perhaps seem the most sensible thing to do. So we're looking at technical standards. Education is the third foundation, and that really needs to be multifaceted and multidimensional education program. And we've got everything from programs for chief executives to programs for digital specialists, workshops, e-learning modules, et cetera, and creating, again, common language around the business seems to us to be very important. And then the other thing which I want to put in here is the plinth, which is a critical thing for our organization, needs to be, which is recognition and sharing. So the ability to identify good stuff that somebody's done and give them credit for it and move it around the business. And the opportunity to identify stuff that didn't turn out to be good, but was learned from, and to offer that up and move it around the business seems to be a huge area of opportunity for us in this space. And then we have the pillars, and the pillars in simple terms are this one here, which I guess I hadn't really thought about, but it again plays back to something you were talking about, Scott. It's a slightly different dimension. I think we met with a guy who was the ex-CMO of EMI, and he talked about the time that EMI got digital, which was just before he was fired, before he chose to leave with all of this meltdown with what's happened in EMI, was actually realizing what digital was above everything else was real-time insight. If it was nothing else, it's real-time insight. And the ability to understand in granular detail, in real time, your customers and what they would value. And I don't think we were thinking about it like this in SAB Miller. I think we were thinking about it as an outbound communications channel. And I think it's fascinating. And in fact, we've got a wonderful guy in the company, ex-Millward Brown, a guy called James Harris, who's about 12 years old, but he has grabbed this thing by the balls and is running with it and has said digital insight and digitally enabled insight is big. So we're doing a lot in building our capability and understanding on that pillar. This pillar here is content and connections, which actually you could argue is the biggest thing, but that's all about syndicated content. It's about social media. It's about all of those other things. I guess the more conventional thing that you would think about. This pillar here is about innovation. So it's utilization of digitally enabled techniques and digitally enabled thinking to drive an innovation agenda. And that's something which, again, we're putting quite a lot of effort into. This one here is about commerce, e-commerce and retail. And again, a relatively new emerging area for us. Two sides to that. Potential direct selling and or potentially partnering with our retail customers to ensure that we, together with them, provide a more valuable service to the end consumer. And then this one here is about database and CRM, which again, an important area for all companies in a world in which the alcohol industry is tending to become more tightly restricted. So broadcast communication is increasingly not the way in certain markets, whether it's Russia or South Africa or Poland. You're getting more and more restrictions. So the ability to be able to have an opt-in database of people who would like to receive personalized communication is a good strategic tool for us. So that's the basic shape of our journey. I'm going to come back to that actually. So just to give you a flavour then of what was the meaning of this. Well, that's the temple. That's where we're heading to. We're on the road, and that, as opposed to being a multiple selection of different wheels, is kind of one wheel, hopefully appropriately spec'd and able to take us on the journey.